I'm Estelle 64, and today I'm going to tell you about the family dinner that changed everything. My daughter-in-law Felicity handed me an envelope with photos of her and my husband Harold in bed together. "Since you're too stupid to notice what's been happening," she smirked. Little did she know I had been collecting evidence for months. As she stood there expecting me to crumble, I simply showed her my phone. If you want to know what happened next to this backstabbing duo, let me know where you're watching from. Hit like and subscribe and settle in for a story about revenge, served at just the right temperature. My marriage to Harold spans 4 decades, most of them happy until recent years. We built a successful family business together, raised our only son Gavin, and created what I thought was an unshakable foundation. Harold was once attentive, loving, and my biggest supporter. We complemented each other perfectly. His business acumen paired with my creative vision helped our marketing firm grow from a small startup to a regional powerhouse. Gavin, now 36, followed in our footsteps. He joined the family business after graduating with honors from business school. Smart, compassionate, and hardworking, he quickly proved himself not just as our son, but as a valuable asset to the company. He respects me deeply and often says I'm his role model for determination and integrity. Our bond has always been strong, with weekly lunch dates, just the two of us, where we talk about everything from business strategies to his personal life. 5 years ago, Gavin met Felicity at a charity event. She was stunning, charming, and seemingly perfect. At 32, she now works as a financial consultant, always dressed impeccably and speaking with calculated precision. From the beginning, something about her felt off to me, though I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Her smile never reached her eyes when she looked at me, but around Gavin, she was the picture of devotion. "Mom, she's the one," Gavin told me after only 3 months of dating. They married in a lavish ceremony 6 months later. I voiced my concerns to Harold that things were moving too quickly, but he dismissed me, saying I was being overprotective. "Let the boy be happy, Estelle," he said. "Felicity is smart and ambitious, exactly what our family needs." Despite 5 years of marriage, they remain childless. Whenever the subject comes up at family gatherings, Felicity smoothly changes the topic, citing career ambitions and not being ready. Gavin seems content with this arrangement, though sometimes I catch a flicker of longing in his eyes when he interacts with his friends' children. The first time I noticed something strange between Harold and Felicity was during last year's Christmas party. They stood in the kitchen talking intimately, their bodies angled toward each other in a way that seemed inappropriate for a father-in-law and daughter-in-law. When I entered, they immediately separated, Felicity's laugh a bit too loud, Harold's explanation about discussing tax strategies a bit too rehearsed. After that, I began noticing more instances, lingering touches, private jokes, and an unusual number of accidental meetings when Gavin was traveling for business. Harold started criticizing things about me he'd never mentioned before: my cooking, my appearance, even the way I spoke at company functions. "You're embarrassing yourself trying to sound younger than you are," he told me after one dinner with clients. "Maybe it's time to step back from the public side of the business." This from the man who once said my way with people was our company's secret weapon. Our bedroom, once a sanctuary of intimacy and conversation, became a cold place of separate sleeping schedules and backs turned away from each other. I tried everything: date nights, counseling suggestions, even spicing things up in ways that made me blush to think about. Harold participated half-heartedly, always with an excuse about stress or fatigue. "We're just getting older, Estelle," he'd say dismissively. "This happens to all couples." But I knew in my heart that wasn't true. Something else was happening to my marriage, to my family, and increasingly I suspected my daughter-in-law was at the center of it all. The changes in Harold became impossible to ignore. He started working out religiously, bought a new wardrobe, and even began using products to darken his graying hair. His phone became his most guarded possession, always face down and password protected. After 38 years of marriage, where we knew each other's passwords as naturally as our own birthdays, this new secrecy stung deeply. As our home grew colder, I watched Gavin remain blissfully unaware, his trust in both his father and his wife completely intact. The weight of what I suspected, and what it would do to my son if true, kept me silent far longer than it should have. The first truly suspicious incident happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I came home early from a dentist appointment and heard hushed voices from Harold's home office. The door was slightly ajar, and through the crack, I saw Felicity perched on the edge of his desk, her skirt hiked up higher than appropriate, while Harold looked up at her with an expression I'd once believed was reserved only for me. "He'll be in Seattle until Friday," Felicity was saying. "That gives us plenty of time." When the floorboard creaked beneath my foot, they instantly shifted apart. Felicity claimed she'd stopped by to discuss a surprise birthday party for Gavin, 3 months before his actual birthday. After that day, I began paying closer attention. Harold's business trips increased in frequency. He started showering as soon as he came home, something he'd never done before. His excuses for late nights grew more elaborate yet vague. Client meetings that he couldn't disclose, confidential projects, industry events that somehow never appeared in any business publications. Then came the text messages I glimpsed accidentally. One night, while Harold was showering, his phone lit up on the bedside table. The preview showed a message from FL Project that read, "Miss your touch already. Tomorrow, same time." My hands shook as I realized FL likely stood for Felicity Not Florida, as the fake contact information suggested. Gavin remained oblivious, working 70-hour weeks and traveling frequently. When he was home, Felicity played the role of devoted wife perfectly. She'd touch his arm affectionately, laugh at his jokes, and speak admiringly of him to others. Yet the moment he left the room, something in her demeanor changed, a mask slipping just slightly. I tried talking to my friend Sandra about my suspicions, but even she thought I might be overreacting. "Are you sure you're not just feeling displaced by a younger woman in your son's life?" she asked gently. "It happens to many mothers-in-law." But I knew the difference between normal family tension and what was happening under my roof. The way Harold's eyes followed Felicity when he thought no one was looking. The inside jokes they seemed to share. The way Felicity would sometimes touch Harold's arm or shoulder in exactly the way she touched Gavin's. One evening while preparing dinner, I overheard them in the garden. Their voices were low, but the words carried through the open kitchen window. "She suspects something," Harold said. "She's been asking questions about my trips." "Let her suspect," Felicity replied. "What's she going to do? Tell Gavin his wife is sleeping with his father? He'd never believe her. You've already laid the groundwork about her becoming forgetful and emotional." My wooden spoon snapped in half in my grip. Not only were they having an affair, but they were actively working to discredit me if I ever spoke up. The betrayal burned in my chest like acid. My husband of 40 years and the woman my son adored were conspiring against me while carrying on an affair that would devastate Gavin if he ever discovered it. That night, I lay awake beside Harold, listening to his even breathing and wondering how we'd arrived at this point. Had I done something to drive him away? Was there some way I could have prevented this? The self-doubt was crippling, but beneath it, a small ember of anger began to glow. I still remember the exact moment when sadness began transforming into determination. I was looking at old photos of Gavin growing up and came across one of Harold and me on our 25th anniversary. We were looking at each other with such love, it made my current reality seem impossible. That's when I realized I deserved better than this betrayal, and Gavin deserved to know the truth about the woman he'd married. The next morning, Harold claimed he was going to a 3-day conference in Atlanta. When I called the hotel where the conference was supposedly being held, they had no record of either the event or Harold's reservation. That was the moment my last doubts evaporated like morning dew under a harsh sun. Instead of confronting Harold immediately with what little evidence I had, I decided to be methodical. If my suspicions were correct, I needed irrefutable proof, not just for myself, but for Gavin. He would need more than his mother's word against his wife and father. First, I began keeping a detailed log of Harold's activities, when he left, when he returned, the excuses he gave, and the inconsistencies I noticed. I created a simple notebook with dates, times, and observations, hiding it inside an old cookbook Harold would never touch. Seeing the pattern laid out in black and white was both validating and heartbreaking. Next, I started checking the credit card statements more carefully. There were charges from hotels just 30 minutes from our home, expensive restaurants on nights Harold claimed to be working late, and jewelry purchases that never made their way to my collection. Each discovery was like a physical blow, but I forced myself to document everything meticulously. The phone records showed frequent calls to a number I didn't recognize. When I searched it online, it came back registered to a Florence Lewis, a name I'd never heard, but with the same initials as the mysterious FL project in Harold's messages. The calls often happened during the exact times Gavin was in business meetings or flights, times his schedule was predictable, and Felicity would know he was unavailable. Still, I needed more conclusive evidence. That's when I remembered Andrea, a college friend who'd become a private investigator after a long career in law enforcement. We'd recently reconnected at our university reunion, and though we hadn't been close in years, her warm hug and instant familiarity made it seem like no time had passed. When I called Andrea and explained my situation, her professional demeanor cracked momentarily. "Estelle, I'm so sorry you're going through this," she said. "Unfortunately, I see this kind of thing more often than you'd believe." Andrea agreed to help, offering a reduced rate when she heard the full story. Within 2 weeks, she delivered what I'd both dreaded and needed: photographs of Harold and Felicity entering and leaving a boutique hotel downtown. The timestamps showed they spent 3 hours there during a Tuesday afternoon when Gavin was on a business trip to Chicago. There were more photos from different days, different hotels, but always the same betrayal. The worst was a close-up of them kissing in Harold's car, parked in the far corner of a shopping center lot. The intimacy and passion in that stolen moment made me physically ill. I locked myself in the bathroom and vomited until there was nothing left but bitter bile and even more bitter tears. "Do you want me to continue surveillance?" Andrea asked when she called to check on me. "I can get more evidence if you need it." "Just a little longer," I replied, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "I need to understand how deep this goes." The double betrayal crushed something fundamental in me. My husband's infidelity was painful enough, but with my son's wife, the woman who sat across from me at family dinners who called me Mom, with a smile that now seemed like a mockery, it was almost too much to bear. I considered confronting them immediately but held back. If I acted too soon, they would deny everything, paint me as a jealous aging woman imagining things. I needed to be smart to protect not just my dignity, but Gavin's future as well. Each night as I lay beside the stranger my husband had become, I reinforced my resolve. This wasn't just about a cheating spouse anymore. This was about protecting my son and standing up for myself. I had spent decades putting my family first. Now I needed that same strength to expose a truth that would forever change us all. What started as an investigation into an affair soon revealed something far more sinister. One afternoon while Harold was golfing, I was organizing his home office, something I'd done monthly throughout our marriage. Behind a stack of business magazines, I found a small, unlabeled thumb drive. My hands trembled as I plugged it into my laptop. It contained financial documents, emails, and recorded conversations between Harold and Felicity that had nothing to do with passion and everything to do with calculation. "We need to move forward with the changes to the will," Felicity said in one audio file dated just 3 weeks earlier. "With Gavin traveling so much, he's distracted enough not to notice anything unusual." "I've scheduled a meeting with Lawrence next week," Harold replied, referring to our family attorney. "But we need to be careful. If Estelle suspects anything before the paperwork is finalized, she could make things difficult. That's why we've been laying groundwork about her mental state." Felicity's voice was cold, analytical. "Between your comments to Gavin about her forgetfulness and my observations about her emotional instability, we're covered. Once the company shares are transferred and the new will is in place, it won't matter what she says." I listened frozen in disbelief as they discussed how to systematically cut me out of the family business I'd helped build and reduce my share of marital assets to the legal minimum. They talked about manipulating Gavin into believing I was becoming mentally unstable due to age, creating a narrative where any accusations I made would be dismissed as confusion or paranoia. The most shocking revelation came when they discussed their long-term plans. Felicity had no intention of staying with Gavin once the assets were secured. She and Harold planned to wait until the dust settled, then orchestrate a situation where she would leave Gavin but maintain her financial stake in the company through careful legal maneuvering. "Once we're positioned correctly, I'll file for divorce from Gavin, citing his workaholic tendencies and emotional neglect," Felicity explained clinically. "With the right lawyers, I can walk away with at least 30% ownership of the company, plus a generous settlement. And then we can finally be together openly." Harold added, his voice softening in a way that made my stomach turn. Felicity's laugh in response was chilling. "Let's just say I'm keeping my options open. You've proven you're not exactly loyal, Harold." That's when I realized the depth of the manipulation at play. Felicity wasn't just having an affair with Harold. She was using him as part of a larger scheme to gain control of our family's wealth. And my husband, blinded by infatuation or midlife crisis or whatever was driving him, couldn't see that he was likely just another stepping stone in her path. With this new understanding, I expanded my investigation. I hired a specialized financial forensic expert to review our company records discreetly. Sure enough, there were concerning patterns: consulting fees to shell companies that appeared to link back to Felicity, unusual transfers between accounts, and gradual changes in signing authorities that reduced my access while expanding Harold's unilateral control. Then I decided to look into Felicity's background more thoroughly. Andrea connected me with a colleague who specialized in deep background checks. What we uncovered was stunning. Felicity Walker wasn't even her original name. She was born Amanda Peterson in a small town in Pennsylvania and had changed her identity after being implicated in a financial fraud scheme 7 years ago. Though never formally convicted, she had left a trail of wealthy older men with diminished bank accounts across 3 states. The private investigator found a pattern. Amanda Felicity would integrate herself into wealthy families, create divisions between family members, and manipulate her way into controlling assets before disappearing. In one particularly troubling case, she had married the son of a real estate developer, had an affair with the father, and ultimately walked away with property and cash valued at over $2 million after both relationships imploded. This wasn't just an affair. This wasn't just financial manipulation. This was a calculated, practiced scheme by a professional con artist, and my family was her current target. I sat alone in my home office late into the night, surrounded by evidence of this breathtaking betrayal, and felt something shift inside me. The hurt and shock were still there, but now they were joined by something else, a fierce, protective anger and determination that burned away my tears and straightened my spine. They thought I was a foolish, aging woman they could easily manipulate and discard. They had drastically underestimated who they were dealing with. I hadn't helped build a multi-million-dollar business by being naive or weak. I was Estelle Morgan, and it was time to remind everyone, especially myself, of exactly what that meant. After discovering the full extent of Felicity and Harold's plan, I knew I needed professional guidance. I contacted Julia Patterson, a razor-sharp divorce attorney who had represented several business associates over the years. I chose her specifically because she had never socialized in our business circles and would be unknown to Harold. "This is one of the most calculated cases I've seen," Julia said after reviewing my evidence. "The good news is you've been incredibly thorough. The bad news is we're dealing with someone who has experience covering her tracks." Over the next few weeks, we developed a comprehensive strategy. First, we secured my financial position. I worked with our company's CFO, who had been with us since the beginning and was unquestionably loyal to me, to protect the business from any sudden changes Harold might attempt. We implemented emergency protocols requiring dual authorization for significant financial decisions, citing recent industry cybersecurity recommendations as the reason. Next, I discreetly transferred my personal assets to new accounts Harold couldn't access. I gathered all our important documents, property deeds, insurance policies, investment records, and created secure copies. Julia helped me draft a new will and power of attorney documents, removing Harold as my decision-maker and installing Gavin instead. "What about directly confronting Harold?" I asked Julia during one of our strategy sessions. "Not yet," she advised. "Right now, our advantage is that they think you're in the dark. The moment you confront them, they'll accelerate their plans. Let's make sure everything is legally secured first." I also focused on gathering more definitive evidence of their affair and conspiracy. I purchased small recording devices and placed them strategically around the house in areas where Harold and Felicity often spoke privately when they thought I wasn't home. While this approach bordered on the unethical, Julia confirmed that in my state recording conversations in my own home, when there was suspicion of criminal conspiracy, was legally defensible. The recordings captured devastating conversations, not just intimate exchanges that confirmed the affair beyond any doubt, but detailed discussions of their plans to manipulate company finances, alienate me from Gavin, and ultimately take control of everything I'd worked for. Once Estelle is out of the picture, converting her company shares will be simple, Harold said in one particularly painful recording. Gavin trusts me completely to handle the financial side. He'll never question the restructuring. And if he does, Felicity asked, then we'll remind him about his mother's declining mental state and how we're protecting the company from her increasingly erratic decisions. Their callousness was breathtaking. This man who had once vowed to love and cherish me was now plotting my professional and personal destruction with cold efficiency. Meanwhile, I worked with Andrea to track down 2 of Felicity's previous victims. One refused to get involved, still traumatized by his experience. But the other, William Hendricks, agreed to provide a sworn affidavit about Felicity's methods and the financial devastation she had left behind. She's incredibly smart and patient, William warned during our video call, his face lined with residual pain. She spent almost 2 years setting up her endgame with my family. By the time we realized what was happening, she'd already legally secured assets that we couldn't recover. With each piece of evidence, each legal preparation, I felt myself growing stronger. The woman who had cried herself to sleep months earlier was being replaced by someone more resolute, more strategic. I looked in the mirror one morning and barely recognized the determined face looking back at me. Gone was the uncertainty in my eyes, replaced by a clear, unwavering purpose. The hardest part was maintaining normalcy around Harold and during family gatherings. I had to pretend nothing was wrong to smile through dinners, where Felicity would touch my husband's arm when she thought no one was looking to act oblivious, when Harold made subtle comments questioning my memory or judgment in front of Gavin. "Remember when your mother got completely confused about the Anderson account?" he'd say casually. "Good thing we caught it before it affected the client relationship. Events that never happened. Mistakes I never made." Each comment was a brick in the wall they were building between me and my son. Preparing to confront them was like planning a military operation. Every detail had to be perfect. The evidence needed to be irrefutable and presented in a way Gavin couldn't deny. The legal protections had to be airtight. And most importantly, I had to be emotionally ready for the explosion that would follow, for the pain in my son's eyes when he learned the truth about his wife and father. After 6 exhausting weeks of preparation, Julia confirmed we had secured everything legally possible. "You're as protected as you can be," she said. "The question now is when and how you want to confront this." I chose to do it at our traditional monthly family dinner, a neutral setting where Gavin would be present, but public enough that extreme reactions would be tempered. I scheduled it for the following Sunday evening, then spent the days leading up to it finalizing every detail of what would become the most difficult night of my life. The day of the family dinner arrived with a strange sense of calm. After months of anxiety, evidence gathering, and preparation, I felt oddly peaceful. Everything was in place. Whatever happened tonight, I would no longer be living a lie. I spent the morning preparing Harold's favorite meal, prime rib with rosemary potatoes, and his mother's secret recipe apple pie for dessert. The irony wasn't lost on me cooking comfort food for the confrontation that would shatter our family's foundation, but I wanted everything to seem perfectly normal until the moment of revelation. Harold seemed distracted all day, constantly checking his phone and making brief calls from our back porch where he thought I couldn't hear him. I caught fragments of conversation with Felicity. "Tonight might be perfect timing," and "she hasn't suspected a thing." If only they knew. Gavin and Felicity arrived at 6:30 sharp. My son hugged me tightly, complimenting the smell wafting from the kitchen. Felicity air-kissed my cheek, her expensive perfume lingering between us like her lies. "Something smells amazing, Mom," Gavin said, hanging his jacket in the entryway closet. "You've outdone yourself again." "Well, it's not every day we have the whole family together," I replied. my voice steady, despite the knowledge of what was hidden in my purse. A tablet loaded with evidence that would forever change how he saw the people in this room. Felicity offered me a bottle of wine, her smile practiced and perfect. "I remembered this is your favorite," she said, though it was actually a brand I had mentioned disliking at a previous dinner. Another small test, another small lie. Dinner began pleasantly enough with discussions about Gavin's recent business trip and the usual neighborhood gossip. Harold seemed increasingly tense, checking his watch frequently. Felicity kept giving him meaningful glances when she thought Gavin was focused on his meal. "Everything okay, Dad?" Gavin eventually asked, noticing his father's distraction. Fine, Harold answered quickly. "Just thinking about that Johnson contract. Big deadline coming up." Another lie. The Johnson contract had been completed weeks ago. As I served the apple pie, I could feel the tension building. Felicity's hand brushed Harold's as I passed the dessert plates. A touch too intimate, too familiar. I pretended not to notice, just as I had pretended for months. After dinner, we moved to the living room with coffee. The moment felt suspended in time, the last few seconds of our old life together, before everything changed. "Estelle, you seem quiet tonight," Felicity remarked with faux concern. "Are you feeling all right? You've seemed a bit confused lately." And there it was, another brick in the wall of their narrative about my mental decline. "I'm perfectly fine, dear," I replied calmly. "Just reflective. Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it?" Harold shifted uncomfortably on the sofa, while Gavin looked between us, sensing undercurrents he couldn't quite identify. Then came the moment. Felicity excused herself briefly and returned with her designer handbag. With a glance at Harold, she pulled out a manila envelope and approached me. "Estelle, I think it's time we had an honest conversation," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I've noticed you've been struggling lately, and I'm concerned about some decisions you've been making for the company." She handed me the envelope, her perfectly manicured fingers lingering as if to emphasize her power in this moment. "Since you're too stupid to notice what's been happening right under your nose, I thought you should see these photos. Maybe they'll help clarify why you should consider stepping back from the business and letting the more competent family members take over." I opened the envelope slowly, though I already knew what I would find. Inside were photographs of Harold and Felicity together, entering hotel rooms, kissing in his car, intimate moments that were meant to destroy me. Gavin stood up, his face a mask of confusion. "What's going on? What photos?" Felicity turned to him with practiced tears beginning to form. "I'm sorry, Gavin. I've been trying to protect you from this. Your mother has been making some concerning decisions at work, and when your father tried to intervene, she threatened to destroy the company unless he complied with certain requests. Things escalated, and I got involved to try to help mediate, but the situation has become inappropriate. We've been worried about her mental state for months now." It was an impressive performance, painting herself as the victim, while suggesting I was not only mentally unstable, but sexually inappropriate with my own son-in-law. Harold looked pale, but nodded along with her narrative, unable to meet Gavin's eyes. "Mom?" Gavin turned to me, confusion and the beginning of horror dawning on his face. "What is this about?" This was the moment they expected me to crumble, to rage or cry or make accusations that would only reinforce their narrative of my instability. Instead, I smiled calmly and reached for my purse. "I think it's time for the truth, don't you?" I said, removing my phone and tablet. "Gavin, please sit down. There's something you need to see." I turned to Felicity, whose triumphant smile had begun to waver at my unexpected composure. "You're right about one thing. There has been a lot happening right under my nose, but I'm not as stupid as you think." With that, I opened a video file on my tablet, a compilation Andrea had helped me create of Harold and Felicity's own recorded words planning their takeover of the company, discussing how to alienate me from Gavin, and even talking about their plans to eventually separate from each other once they had secured the assets. "What is this?" Harold sputtered, his face draining of color, as his own voice filled the room describing me as past her prime and a liability to the company. Gavin's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to dawning horror as the evidence mounted. When the recording played of Felicity clearly stating her intentions to divorce him after securing her financial position, he physically recoiled as if struck. "Turn it off," Felicity demanded, her composed facade cracking. "This is obviously manipulated. Gavin, your mother is clearly unwell creating these false—" "The timestamps and digital signatures say otherwise," I interrupted calmly. "As do the forensic financial reports showing how you've been systematically attempting to redirect company assets." I pulled out a folder containing the documentation from our financial investigator. "And then there's your background, Felicity, or should I say, Amanda Peterson." Her face went completely white. "You don't know what you're talking about." 3 previous instances of similar schemes in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Connecticut. I continued laying out another folder containing her background check and William Hendricks's affidavit. Always the same pattern: integrate into a wealthy family, create division, manipulate assets, disappear. Harold stood up abruptly. "Estelle, stop this right now. You're embarrassing yourself and hurting our son with these delusions." "They're not delusions when they're documented, Harold," I replied, my voice steady despite the pain tearing through me. "The affair I could perhaps have forgiven eventually, but conspiring to steal the company I helped build, deliberately trying to convince our son I'm mentally incompetent, planning to destroy his marriage after you'd taken what you wanted." I shook my head slowly. "That's unforgivable." The room fell silent, except for Gavin's ragged breathing as he flipped through the evidence folders, his hands shaking. "Dad," he finally said, his voice barely a whisper, "tell me this isn't true. Tell me you haven't been—" He couldn't even finish the sentence. Harold's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him as the weight of his exposed betrayal settled on him. "Gavin, son, it's complicated. Your mother and I, we've been growing apart for years. Felicity and I, we just what?" Gavin's voice rose sharply. "Just fell in love. Just decided to betray everyone who trusted you. Just thought you'd steal from your own family." Felicity made one last desperate attempt. "Gavin, baby, listen to me. Your mother has twisted everything. Yes, your father and I grew close, but it was because we were both concerned about her behavior. These recordings, they're taken out of context. Stop lying." Gavin shouted, something breaking in him as he held up a particularly damning financial document with Felicity's signature. "It's all here. Everything. How long has this been going on?" The confrontation continued for another excruciating hour. Accusations flew, tears fell, and decades of family bonds unraveled in real time. Harold eventually admitted to the affair, but tried to downplay the financial manipulation, claiming Felicity had led him into it. Felicity continued to deny everything, despite the overwhelming evidence alternating between tearful pleas to Gavin and venomous glares at me when she thought my son wasn't looking. By the time they left, separately Gavin refusing to let Felicity come home with him, my beautiful dining room looked like a battlefield strewn with evidence of betrayal and the wreckage of what had once been a family. As the front door closed behind my devastated son, I sat alone in the sudden silence, surrounded by the aftermath. The confrontation had gone exactly as planned. The evidence had been irrefutable, and yet there was no triumph in this moment, only a profound sadness for what had been lost and the long road of healing that lay ahead. The weeks following that fateful dinner were both painful and transformative. Gavin filed for divorce immediately, citing irreconcilable differences and fraudulent misrepresentation. When Felicity realized the extent of the evidence against her, she didn't even contest it, choosing instead to negotiate for a minimal settlement that would keep her criminal history from being entered into public record. Harold moved out the morning after our confrontation. He called repeatedly during those first few days, alternating between apologies, justifications, and accusations that I had overreacted to what he tried to minimize as a brief indiscretion. I let his calls go to voicemail, saving each message for my attorney. "Estelle, please," he begged in one particularly desperate message. 40 years of marriage has to count for something. We can work through this. I made a terrible mistake, but I still love you." Love. The word seemed hollow, now stripped of meaning by his actions. What kind of love plots to destroy its object? What kind of love lies and manipulates and betrays? 2 months after the confrontation, we met with our respective attorneys to begin formal divorce proceedings. Harold had aged a decade in those 8 weeks, hair grayer posture, stooped eyes haunted. For a moment, seeing him across the conference table, I felt a flicker of the love we'd once shared. Then I remembered the recordings, the photos, the coldly calculated plans to destroy me, and that flicker died. "I'll give you whatever you want," he said after the attorneys stepped out to consult on a procedural matter. "The house, half the company, anything. I just want another chance." I looked at this man I had spent most of my life with and felt nothing but a distant sadness. What I wanted was a husband who honored his vows. What I wanted was the father of my child to behave with integrity. Those things aren't yours to give anymore, Harold. You threw them away. The divorce proceedings went surprisingly smoothly after that. Harold didn't contest any of my claims or demands, perhaps hoping his cooperation would somehow pave a way back into my life. The final settlement left me with the family home, 50% ownership of the company, and a substantial portion of our joint assets. Harold retained 30% of the business, with the remaining 20% staying with Gavin. Felicity disappeared from our lives almost completely. Through the divorce grapevine, I heard she had moved to Arizona and was already dating a widowed real estate developer. Some lessons are never learned, it seems. The most difficult part of the aftermath was watching Gavin struggle with the dual betrayal. He threw himself into work, avoiding personal conversations and family gatherings. For several weeks, he wouldn't speak to Harold at all, communicating only through attorneys or company executives when absolutely necessary. "How could he do this?" Gavin asked during one rare vulnerable moment over coffee in my kitchen. "Not just to you, but to me. She was my wife, Mom, and he—" I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I don't have an answer that will make this hurt less. Sometimes people we love make choices that defy understanding." Gradually, we began rebuilding our relationship on new, stronger foundations. We established a weekly dinner tradition, just the two of us, where conversations slowly expanded from safe topics like business to more personal matters. His feelings about the betrayal, his fears about trusting again, his guilt over not having seen what was happening. "You have nothing to feel guilty about," I assured him repeatedly. They worked very hard to hide their actions from both of us. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Gavin and I made a decision to restructure the company leadership. We brought in new board members, implemented stronger financial controls, and created a transparent corporate governance structure that would prevent anyone from manipulating company assets again. Harold remained a minority shareholder, but was removed from day-to-day operations. It was a business decision, not a punitive one, though I would be lying if I said there wasn't some satisfaction in watching him clean out his office under the watchful eye of security. As for me, I found myself embarking on an unexpected journey of rediscovery. After decades of defining myself primarily as Harold's wife and Gavin's mother, I suddenly had space to remember who Estelle Morgan was at her core. I reconnected with old friends who had fallen by the wayside during my marriage. I took painting classes, something I'd always wanted to do but had set aside for family responsibilities. I joined a hiking group for women over 50 and found myself laughing more freely than I had in years as we conquered local trails and shared life stories around evening campfires. One of these new friends, Judith, convinced me to try online dating just for practice, almost a year after my divorce. I created a profile with great reluctance and even greater skepticism. To my surprise, I received several thoughtful messages from age-appropriate men who seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. Thomas was the third person I met for coffee, a retired architecture professor with kind eyes and a genuine laugh that made the people at neighboring tables smile. Our coffee extended into lunch, then a walk through the nearby botanical gardens. By the end of that first meeting, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a very long time: the simple joy of connecting with someone who saw me clearly and valued what they saw. Our relationship developed slowly, deliberately. We were both old enough to know that rushing would only lead to mistakes. After 4 months of dating, he invited me to meet his adult children, an offer I recognized as the significant step it was. They welcomed me warmly, and seeing Thomas surrounded by his family showed me yet another dimension of this thoughtful man. When Gavin met Thomas 6 months into our relationship, I watched my son carefully for signs of discomfort or disapproval. Instead, after an initial period of protective skepticism, they fell into an easy conversation about classic cars that lasted through dinner and well into the evening. "He's good for you, Mom," Gavin said when Thomas stepped away from the table. "I haven't seen you smile like this in, well, maybe ever." Those words meant everything to me. My son's happiness had always been central to my own, and his blessing of this new chapter in my life removed the last lingering shadow of guilt I'd felt about moving forward. Now, almost 2 years after that devastating family dinner, when Felicity handed me that envelope, my life bears little resemblance to what it was before. I'm still active in the company, but have scaled back my hours to make room for travel hobbies and my relationship with Thomas. Gavin has stepped fully into his leadership role at work and has recently begun dating again, cautiously, thoughtfully. Harold lives alone in a downtown condo, still trying occasionally to reconnect with both Gavin and me. Those wounds may heal someday, but not through forced forgiveness or pretending the betrayal never happened. Real healing requires acknowledgement, atonement, and time. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if I should have seen the signs earlier or acted sooner. But then I remind myself that hindsight offers a clarity that isn't available when you're in the middle of a situation, especially one involving people you love and trust implicitly. The truth is, discovering my husband's betrayal with my daughter-in-law wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new chapter I never could have anticipated. In losing what I thought was my foundation, I found strengths within myself I never knew existed. In facing the worst kind of betrayal, I discovered the power of standing firmly in my truth. If you're facing your own version of betrayal or life upheaval right now, please know this. It's not the crisis that defines you, but how you respond to it. Trust yourself enough to seek the truth, even when that truth hurts. Value yourself enough to demand better than betrayal. And remember that sometimes losing what you thought you needed makes space for what you truly deserve. Have you ever had to completely reimagine your life after a betrayal or major change? How did you find the strength to move forward? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more journeys of resilience and renewal. And remember, sharing these stories helps others feel less alone in their own struggles, so please consider sharing with someone who might need to hear that better days are possible, even after the worst betrayals. Thank you for listening, and remember, your story isn't over yet. It's just taking an unexpected turn towards something that might be even better than you imagined.